I was sipping my coffee on the porch when I heard the low, sinister whirring. My wife shrieked from inside, then stormed out in her bathrobe, pointing at the bedroom window. A drone had been hovering outside it, less than 3 feet from the glass, tilting as if it were peeking in. I dropped my mug and sprinted inside, but by the time I reached the front yard, the thing zipped off like it knew I was coming. I stood there, barefoot in the gravel, trying to process the sheer audacity of what just happened. This wasn't a kid playing around. This was surveillance. And I already had a good idea whose hands were behind the remote. Our farm sat just on the border of the HOA's reach, not officially under their authority, but close enough for Karen, our self-declared neighborhood enforcer, to stick her nose where it didn't belong. She'd always had a problem with how we ran wild out here. She didn't like the sounds of our roosters in the morning. She didn't like that we parked our tractor in the open. And she really didn't like that my wife sunbathed in the backyard wearing whatever she pleased, or sometimes nothing at all. But instead of talking like a normal person, she chose espionage. At first, I'd seen glimpses of the drone here and there. Once above the cornfield, once near the barn. I figured it belonged to one of the teenagers down the road. But after today's peeping stunt, I got serious. I grabbed the binoculars and climbed the water tower, scanning the area to see where the little bugger had flown off to. And sure enough, it sailed straight down Maple Lane and landed gently in the manicured backyard of Karen's 2-story colonial, the one with the unnecessary Greek columns and a HOA proud sign in the garden bed. She was waiting there with her arms crossed like a general debriefing a returning soldier. I marched over within the hour. No yelling, no accusations, just a calm knock on the door. She opened it like she'd been expecting me. Her smile was plastic, her tones syrupy sweet. "Can I help you?" she asked, standing just a little too far in the doorway to let me see inside. I told her exactly what I'd seen. That the drone was hovering at eye level with my bedroom window. That it's not the first time it's been on my property. That it needs to stop. She didn't deny it. Not even a little. Instead, she tilted her head and said, "Well, if everything you're doing is legal, why would you be so worried about a drone? It's not like I'm recording anything inappropriate." That sentence alone told me she absolutely was recording something inappropriate. I took a deep breath and said I wouldn't press charges yet, but if it happened again, I'd consider my options. Her smirk widened. "Suit yourself," she chirped, and shut the door before I could say another word. That night, I walked into my barn, looked up at the old wooden rafter near the roof, and gave a low whistle. A large shadow stirred. My bald eagle, Liberty, slowly turned her head and blinked down at me with those sharp, intelligent eyes. She'd been with me since I rescued her from a roadside trap 5 years ago. I had all the licenses, all the permit. I'd trained her using falconry techniques passed down from my grandfather. She was smart, loyal, and strong, and thanks to a little accident involving a hawk and a shiny weather vane, she had a vendetta against flying objects. I told her we had a job coming. A real one. The next morning, I set up a trail cam and waited. Sure enough, 7:12 a.m. sharp, the drone returned. It zipped in from the same direction, hovered over the same parts of the yard, even dipped low to check out the chicken coop. It did a wide sweep of the tractor, circled the greenhouse, then made its way toward the house. This time I was ready. I stepped out, rake in hand, and took a swing. The drone bobbed and weaved, just out of reach, before shooting upward and darting back the way it came like it was laughing at me. Liberty let out a short, sharp cry from the barn rafters. I checked the trail cam footage. The drone had come closer this time. Much closer. It had focused on my wife's window again, and the greenhouse. What was it looking for? My crop rotation plan? My irrigation layout? Or just a thrill? Later that afternoon, I followed the same path it had taken, keeping to the shadows, cutting through trees, until I saw it land once again on Karen's patio. But this time she wasn't alone. 3 other HOA members were with her, gathered around a tablet, watching the live feed. They were laughing. That told me two things. One, this wasn't just Karen being nosy. It was coordinated. And two, they had no idea what was about to come for them. I didn't go back to their house. I didn't make another warning. Instead, I set up a plan. First, I reinforced Liberty's training, added motion triggers to the yard perimeter, fed her fresh trout, gave her sky drills in open field. She was still as sharp as ever. Then I made sure she'd recognize the sound of that drone. I replayed the footage, let her watch its path. Liberty's head followed the screen. She clicked her beak. That was all I needed. By the time night fell, I had rigged the porch lights to a motion sensor set to blink red when the drone re-entered the airspace. Liberty was perched silently in the dark of the silo, her wings tucked, her eyes locked on the open sky. This time, when Karen sent her mechanical spy over my barn, it wouldn't be coming back in one piece. The next morning started off strangely quiet. No drone, no buzzing, no drama. It felt almost like the calm before a storm, and I didn't trust it for a second. I was tossing feed to the chickens when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. I looked up to see 3 cars pulling into my driveway, one of which had the HOA logo plastered on the side. Out stepped Karen, of course, wearing a sun hat large enough to shade a patio set and flanked by 2 board members. Jim, the guy who once tried to fine a neighbor for having decorative garden gnomes, and Linda, who had an allergic reaction to a whiff of compost last fall and petitioned to ban organic odors. All 3 were holding clipboards like they were entering a crime scene. Karen wasted no time. "We're conducting a community safety inspection," she announced, ignoring my confused look and marching straight toward the barn. I stepped in front of her. "Hold up," I said. "This is my property. You've got no HOA authority out here." Jim chimed in, looking smug. "Your property lies within the HOA's shared visual influence zone. That gives us the right to ensure you're not contributing to community disturbances." I blinked. Visual influence zone? Karen nodded like it made perfect sense. "If we can see it, we can regulate it. And several members have complained about a large predatory bird intimidating them during walks." I glanced up. Liberty was perched high on the silo, preening her feathers like a diva who knew she was being watched. Karen pointed her clipboard toward the barn, demanding to inspect the aerial hazard they'd heard about. I told them again they had no jurisdiction, but Jim whipped out a flimsy printout of what looked like a self-made ordinance with the HOA seal crudely photoshopped in the corner. It was laughable. Still, I let them peek, mainly because I had nothing to hide and everything to prove. They stepped into the barn cautiously, as if expecting to find a military drone lab or a cage full of bats. What they got instead was Liberty, perched calmly with one leg tucked in, and a few goats munching hay in the back. I even offered them some fresh eggs just to watch them squirm. Linda refused to breathe the air and wrapped a scarf around her face. They left looking confused but unsatisfied, like they'd expected a Bond villain's lair and instead got Old MacDonald's shed. As they drove off, Karen gave one last glance back, her eyes darting toward the silo where Liberty still stood proudly. She wasn't done. I could feel it. Later that night, as I locked the chicken coop and checked the perimeter lights, I saw the drone return. But it didn't approach directly this time. It zigzagged around the edges of the property, avoiding the trail cam zones like it knew where they were. That confirmed it, they'd studied my layout. Maybe even during their fake inspection. I slipped inside the barn, gave a single low whistle, and Liberty immediately perked up. She knew it was go time. I turned off the floodlights, kept the barn doors cracked just enough for Liberty to have a clean launch path, and waited. The drone crept in slowly now, silent but glowing faintly with red lights. It hovered low, closer than before, maybe emboldened by the lack of visible resistance. I hit the trigger. The red perimeter lights flashed twice. In one fluid motion, Liberty leapt from her perch and vanished into the dark. It was silent for maybe 4 seconds. Then a sharp fluttering gust and a sudden clank of metal hitting wood echoed through the yard. I stepped outside and found the drone's right rotor twitching on the ground. A foot away sat Liberty, completely still, the rest of the drone trapped beneath one powerful claw. She looked at me like she was waiting for the next command. I scooped up the wreckage and brought it into the workshop. Inside, I disassembled the drone on my workbench. It wasn't your average off-the-shelf drone. This one had a miniature hard drive, a high-def camera, and a tiny mic embedded into the frame. And when I pulled out the SD card and slotted it into my laptop, I found hours of footage. Not just from my property, but from others nearby, inside people's backyards, through their windows, even some weird thermal imaging from night flights. Karen had been running her own airborne surveillance program. And not just on me. I drove straight to the sheriff's office the next morning. He laughed when I told him a bald eagle had taken down a spying drone mid-flight, but he stopped laughing when I showed him the footage. His face changed fast as he scrolled through clip after clip, recognizing a few backyards and houses he knew personally. I told him about the drone's repeated presence, about the HOA's fake inspection, and how Karen admitted she was using it under the guise of community safety. The sheriff rubbed his chin and said, "I'll look into it," which meant he wasn't ready to take sides yet. But the seed was planted. Word got around, as it always does in towns like ours. By sunset, everyone from the mailman to the feed store cashier had heard about the Eagle takedown. Some folks thought it was hilarious, others were furious that their privacy might have been invaded. I figured Karen would lay low for a while after the sheriff visit. But I underestimated just how far she was willing to go. The next morning, I was hauling hay when I heard the buzzing again. But this time it was louder, deeper. I looked up and nearly dropped the bale. Hovering above my cornfield was a new drone, twice the size of the last one, gleaming silver, with 8 rotors and a blinking infrared sensor that scanned back and forth like something from a sci-fi movie. She'd upgraded. Not just a new drone, but one clearly designed for longer flights, higher altitude, and more invasive surveillance. And it was flying higher, just enough to stay out of Liberty's direct reach. I realized then this wasn't just about Karen being nosy anymore. This was about power. Control. She couldn't stop me with the HOA. She couldn't win face to face. So now, she was trying to dominate from the sky. I stood there watching the new drone glide slowly across my land like it owned the place, and all I could think was, if she wanted an air war, she was going to get one. But I wouldn't fight it with noise or complaint. I had something better. I had Liberty. And a plan. The new drone hovered like it had something to prove. It wasn't darting around like the first one. It glided slow and steady, methodical, almost smug, casting a faint whirring hum that irritated the back of my teeth. I stood by the fence post and stared up at it, jaw clenched. It was out of Liberty's normal range. Smart move on Karen's part. But I knew something she didn't. Liberty wasn't just a symbol of freedom for me. She was a trained hunter, sharp as a tack and more coordinated than any mechanical toy with a camera. And now I was going to show her how a real aerial operator worked. Back in the barn, I laid the pieces of the first drone on my workbench. The damage from Liberty's first takedown wasn't total. She'd actually brought it in almost perfectly intact, as if she knew I needed it for evidence. I turned the drone over and stared at the underbelly where the SD card had been. I'd already given a copy of that data to the sheriff, but I kept one for myself. There was something deeply unsettling about the way it had documented everything. Every corner of my property had been mapped, timestamps, flight paths, magnified images of windows and doors. The drone had thermal tracking capabilities, and when I looked deeper into the metadata on the files, I saw that its GPS had been logging coordinates from 5 other properties. Karen wasn't just being nosy, she was running a whole private surveillance grid. That night, I called my cousin Derek. He was a retired Air Force drone technician and the only person I trusted with what I was about to do. He drove up the next morning in his beat-up truck, climbed out with a thermos of black coffee, and looked at Liberty like she was an old comrade. "She's a beast," he said, watching her stretch her wings inside the barn. She's got better instincts than half the pilots you served with, I replied, and he didn't argue. We got to work modifying her gear. Over the years, I'd fitted Liberty with a lightweight GPS harness and a small camera for when I needed aerial views of the back pastures. This time, Derek helped me install something new, a flexible rig with a magnetic quick-release designed to carry and drop small objects with precision. It wouldn't weigh her down, and more importantly, it gave me options. By sunset, Liberty was back in the air with the new rig strapped snug against her feathers. She soared high over the hills while I directed her with whistle tones, testing range and response. Derek monitored her flight path from the laptop in the truck, and when I gave the signal, she performed a slow dive, released the dummy payload, and glided back toward us like she was showing off. It landed perfectly in the target ring we'd drawn in chalk in the dirt. She's got this, Derek said. Easily. The next day, Karen's upgraded drone returned. This time, it came early, just past 6 in the morning, before the sun even cleared the trees. I spotted its blinking lights, slicing through the sky like a predator on patrol. I gave a short whistle from the porch, and Liberty launched silently from the silo roof. I watched her climb. Higher and higher, circling wide so she wouldn't be spotted. The drone moved toward the greenhouse, lowering slightly, probably zooming in on the tomato rows. That was her mistake. At that altitude, Liberty was within striking distance. And she knew the signal. She dived. Her wings folded, her body became a bullet, and in seconds she was right above the drone. But instead of shredding it like last time, she tilted mid-flight and clipped the drone's rear propeller with just enough force to send it spiraling. It dropped like a wounded bird and landed in the shallow mud near the pond with a sad, mechanical sputter. I sprinted out to retrieve it. Karen's new toy was tougher, sure, but not indestructible. The impact cracked the casing, and the internal fan was bent at an angle. This thing cost thousands, no doubt. I popped the casing open and, just like before, found an SD card and a wireless signal unit still blinking weakly. I turned it off and took the whole mess back to the shop. This time, the footage shocked even me. The drone had been flying lower than I realized. There were clips zoomed in through my living room window, clear enough to see what shows we'd been watching on TV. Even worse, it had footage of my neighbor's teenage daughter sunbathing in their backyard. The resolution was too good. It made my stomach turn. I didn't call the sheriff this time. I brought the evidence directly to my neighbor. We sat at his kitchen table watching the footage in silence. His face grew darker with each clip. "I'll handle this," he said through clenched teeth. By noon, the whole street was buzzing. Derek and I went back to training Liberty for Phase 2. This wasn't just about protecting my farm anymore. Karen was crossing serious lines now, ones that could land her in real legal trouble if the wrong people saw what she'd been recording. That evening, just before sunset, the drone returned again, patched up, slightly noisier, but still operational. Karen was either unbelievably arrogant or just plain obsessed. I waited until it passed the oak tree near the barn, then gave the signal. Liberty didn't dive this time. She took off like a jet, looped wide, and came up behind the drone unnoticed. She hovered directly over it, then dropped a small net fitted with weighted edges that Derek and I had crafted from old fishing line and sinkers. The net caught one of the rear propellers mid-spin. The drone wobbled violently, then spiraled downward and slammed into the grass behind the goat pen. Liberty landed beside it like a soldier returning from battle, her head high, feathers ruffling in the breeze. I didn't even touch the drone this time. I took photos of it right where it lay, damaged and tangled in the net. Then I drove the photos and the SD card from the previous drone to the sheriff's office. He wasn't laughing anymore. He leaned back in his chair, tapped the desk with his pen, and said, "This looks like criminal surveillance now. Especially with the minor in those recordings." I nodded. "And she's still flying?" "Well, not for long," he replied. "We'll take it from here." But something told me Karen wouldn't go down without one more stunt. Something public. Something loud. She always wanted to win in the court of HOA opinion. I could feel her winding up for something bigger. That was fine by me. I was winding up too. 3 days passed, and for a brief moment, the skies were silent. No buzzing. No flickering lights above the barn. No creeping surveillance hovering over the greenhouse or back porch. Even the animals sensed it. The goats were calmer, the chickens didn't scatter like they used to when the shadow of the drone passed overhead, and Liberty spent her afternoons on the silo, wings tucked in, enjoying the peace. But I knew better. Karen wasn't gone. She was waiting, planning, and probably ordering something even more invasive than before. And sure enough, on the 4th evening, just after sunset, I heard a new sound, deeper, slower, and meaner. It wasn't the high-pitched buzz of a hobby drone. This thing growled. I stepped outside and looked up. It was massive, at least 3 feet wide, a black matte body with 8 rotors and twin red lights scanning the field like search beacons. It hovered much higher than her earlier models, staying just out of range of Liberty's natural dive. But this drone didn't care about being subtle. It swept across the fields in slow arcs, like it was searching for something. It carried a spotlight underneath, casting long streaks of white across the corn rows and the side of my barn. I stood in the field with my hands on my hips and stared right up at it. If Karen wanted a war, she just declared it with a floodlight and intimidation tactic. The next morning, the HOA meeting flyer showed up on my front gate. They'd posted it like it was some kind of legal notice. Printed in bold font, with Karen's name signed at the bottom, it announced an emergency meeting to discuss aggressive wildlife, improper predator containment, and community-endangering retaliation methods. In other words, Liberty. They were planning to pin everything on my eagle and make her the scapegoat. The meeting was to be held at my neighbor's barn, neutral ground, supposedly, but we all knew Karen had hand-picked the location and stacked the guest list. I arrived early and parked my truck where it could be seen. I brought the drone fragments the net Liberty had used, and a copy of the drone footage on a USB drive. Karen was already there, greeting people like a politician. Her oversized drone sat on display behind her car like it was some kind of trophy. She wore sunglasses even though we were inside and waved her clipboard like a baton, rallying the crowd. She started the meeting by listing off alleged bird attacks, most of which were completely fabricated. She told the crowd Liberty had hunted her drone, that my property was being turned into a weaponized wildlife training ground, and that the safety of the neighborhood was at stake. She spoke with fake concern, masking her thirst for control behind thin smiles and exaggerated hand gestures. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't raise my voice. I just walked to the front, set the shattered drone pieces on the table, and plugged the USB into the projector. Within seconds, the room fell silent as the footage played. Images of Karen's drone zooming in through windows. Clips of private backyards captured at night. Recordings of conversations between neighbors who had no idea they were being watched. A thermal image of someone showering. Gasps filled the air. People shifted in their seat. Karen's confident smirk faded into tight-lipped panic. She tried to interrupt, but I kept going. I explained how Liberty was a legally licensed bird under wildlife protection permit. I explained how every strike she made was in response to trespassing, not aggression. I showed timestamps and GPS data linking her drones to multiple homes, not just mine. Then I played the clip of Liberty dropping the net, how she captured the drone without destroying it, acting with more control and precision than the person behind the remote. The crowd turned quickly. Faces once neutral now looked angry. Not at me, but at Karen. People began murmuring about their own suspicions, about strange drone sightings, about the way Karen always seemed to know what was happening before anyone else. One man even stood up and said his daughter had mentioned being followed by a buzzing thing while sunbathing. That was the breaking point. Karen tried to claim it was all a misunderstanding, that the drones were part of a community safety initiative, but no one was buying it. Her allies from the board looked away, avoiding eye contact. The vote to remove her from the HOA leadership wasn't even close. Almost every hand went up. She stood frozen, clipboard in hand, like someone had just knocked the wind out of her. But I wasn't done. Because that night, Karen's drone came back one last time. Maybe it was one final attempt to assert control, or maybe she wanted to prove she couldn't be stopped. Either way, it was a mistake. This time, Liberty wasn't alone. Earlier that day, I'd taken her out into the hills for training and noticed something unusual, another bald eagle circling nearby. A wild one. Young, curious, unafraid. Over the past week, it had started trailing Liberty during her flights. They'd even landed on the same branch once, not fighting, just observing each other. I wasn't sure what to expect, but that night, as Karen's drone returned and lit up the sky like a miniature search helicopter, Liberty took to the air, and the wild eagle followed. They rose together, side by side, two majestic silhouettes against the moonlit clouds. I gave the signal, a sharp whistle followed by a high chirp. Liberty banked hard and dived. The wild eagle followed in perfect sync. It was beautiful, like a choreographed aerial ballet. The drone tried to ascend, to escape upward into the clouds, but it was too slow. Liberty struck first, shredding one rotor with a precision hit. The wild eagle slammed into the other side like a hammer. The drone dropped out of the sky in spirals, smoke trailing from its chassis, and landed with a metallic thud directly in Karen's koi pond, flooding the decorative rocks and sending fish flailing. The timing couldn't have been better. Karen stood on her porch and watched it happen, helpless. She screamed something unintelligible into the night, shaking her fists at the sky. I didn't need to say a word. The next morning, the sheriff showed up again. This time with a formal warrant. Apparently, he'd received anonymous footage, possibly from someone at the HOA meeting, showing Karen reviewing drone feeds on her home office monitors. Hidden cameras, audio logs, and all. She was arrested for unauthorized surveillance and violation of privacy laws, and several neighbors filed complaints of their own. Liberty? She became a local legend. Kids drew pictures of her for school projects. The 4-H Club invited me to speak about protective birds and property rights, and someone even suggested building a wooden carving of her for the town park. As for the wild eagle, it returned every few days, always keeping a respectful distance. I started calling it justice. Together, Liberty and Justice had done what no HOA meeting ever could. They shut Karen down, for good. The quiet that followed Karen's downfall was almost eerie. For the first time in weeks, my mornings began with the natural sounds of the farm, roosters crowing, goats bleating, and the rustle of leaves in the breeze, instead of the mechanical buzz of a drone or the fake pleasant tone of a clipboard-wielding Karen trying to enforce her twisted version of community standards. My wife sat out on the porch again, sipping her coffee without glancing nervously at the sky. Even Liberty seemed more at ease, taking longer flights and returning with a sort of dignified strut, like she knew what she had accomplished and was enjoying the peace she'd fought for. But just because Karen was gone didn't mean the story was over. The sheriff's investigation unearthed far more than I ever expected. The footage we had submitted, combined with the recordings found at her house, painted a disturbing picture. Karen had been operating her surveillance network for over a year. She hadn't just been watching me. She'd been spying on half the county, recording backyard conversations, family barbecues, even children playing in inflatable pools. Her drone footage had timestamps that matched up with several burglaries that had occurred in nearby neighborhoods, and while there wasn't hard evidence linking her directly to the crimes, it certainly didn't look good. What's more, some of the footage was marked with file names like potential risk, non-compliant, and ugly shed. She'd been categorizing people based on how well they fit her idea of what the neighborhood should look like. Word spread like wildfire. The local paper picked up the story, and then a regional news channel ran a segment titled, HOA Queen Turned Spy. They interviewed neighbors who had felt creeped out for months, people who suddenly remembered seeing drones hovering near their homes but had written it off as kids or weather research. When the footage came out, they realized they'd been wrong. Karen became infamous almost overnight. Even the HOA, which had tried so hard to protect her, was now desperately trying to distance itself. They voted to dissolve the current board entirely and reform it with input from the community. I was offered a seat on the new board, but I declined. I hadn't gone through all this just to spend my days arguing over lawn heights and fence paint colors. Instead, I focused on the farm. With Karen out of the picture and the HOA leadership crumbling, life returned to normal, or at least a version of it that didn't include privacy invasions. The crops grew strong that season, the hens were laying like clockwork, and Liberty had taken to flying with her new companion, the wild eagle we still called Justice. The two of them had become a bit of a local attraction. People would drive by just to see if they could catch a glimpse of the eagle pair soaring together over the field. A few even brought cameras and sketchpads, treating it like a nature preserve. Then, about a week after Karen's arrest, I received an envelope in the mail. It had no return address. Inside was a letter written in shaky cursive and a folded photo. The letter was from an older man named Raymond, who said he was Karen's father. He explained that he hadn't spoken to her in nearly 2 years, not since she'd moved into the HOA neighborhood and started becoming obsessed with order and control. He wrote that she had always been a strong-willed child but had grown into someone he no longer recognized. He'd seen the news stories and was ashamed. He didn't excuse her actions, but he thanked me, oddly enough, for not humiliating her more than she'd already done to herself. Attached to the letter was a photo of Karen as a child, maybe 7 years old, holding a tiny baby eagle at a wildlife center, grinning ear to ear. I stared at that photo for a long time. It didn't change anything she'd done, but it reminded me that people don't just become monsters out of nowhere. Something breaks along the way. Something hardens. I didn't feel sorry for her, not really, but I did feel something I hadn't expected: closure. Like I'd closed a chapter that didn't just end with revenge, but with a strange, bittersweet understanding. Later that afternoon, I found myself back in the barn, watching Liberty and Justice perched side by side on the rafters. The sun was setting behind them, casting long golden beams across the hay. It was a perfect moment. I took out my phone and snapped a photo, then sent it to the local paper. They published it the next morning with a caption that read, "Guardians of the Sky, Liberty and Justice soar over a freed farm." Weeks passed. The drones never returned. Karen's trial date was set, and while most of the charges were privacy violations and misuse of technology, it was enough to ensure she wouldn't be flying anything anytime soon. Rumor had it she was planning to move to another state after the legal mess wrapped up. No one seemed eager to stay in touch. Meanwhile, I went back to training Liberty. Not for defense anymore, but for show. We began doing weekend exhibitions for local kids, teaching them about raptors and the importance of respecting wildlife. Justice still didn't come close to people, but he always circled nearby during the events, as if keeping an eye on things from above. People loved it. Kids asked if they were married, and I laughed every time. They weren't, but they were loyal, bonded by something bigger than words. One day, the sheriff stopped by the farm. He brought a small wooden box and handed it to me without a word. Inside was a silver medal with a blue ribbon and a certificate that read, "Awarded to Liberty, for outstanding service in the protection of personal property and privacy." I laughed out loud. It was absurd and also perfect. I hung the certificate right above Liberty's perch in the barn. She blinked at it, unimpressed, then fluffed her feathers and returned to preening. The farm never felt safer. Not just because the drones were gone, but because of what it represented. We had fought back. Not with fists, not with lawyers, but with patience, cleverness, and a feathered fury that no amount of HOA paperwork could stop. The sky was ours again. Not just mine, but Liberty's, Justice's, and everyone else's who'd ever felt like they didn't have the power to say no. Karen flew her drone over my farm. She thought she could watch us, control us, even judge us from above. But in the end, she learned the hard way that up here, there's always someone watching from higher. Someone with talons. Someone with wings. And this time, she was the one grounded. For good.